One of the biggest drivers of relationship breakups is money. You might think you've met your perfect match until they end up having been a tightwad perhaps, or on the other hand, maybe overly frivolous with their spending as well. So it may or may not come as a surprise that new research shows nearly 1/3 of couples keep their bank accounts separate. News Corp's personal finance writer Sophie Elsworth is with us this evening from Melbourne. So yeah, why is it so important when it comes to money and relationships to understand it, do you think?
Well, it's really important when you're in a couple that you actually make sure you're on the same financial page. The research today shows that a lot of people actually keep their money separate. Look, this isn't always the worst thing, Brooke. It can work. But the main thing here is that couples are transparent with each other and make sure that they are on the same financial page.
When I asked a previous guest about something similar and we talked about what should couples do, I think her advice was pretty good, that you should do whatever causes you the least stress and the least arguments. So that might be different for different people. But what do you think about how couples should manage their money together?
Well, early on in a relationship, it's probably a bit awkward asking about money, but as it progresses and it becomes a more serious relationship, you should be open and honest with each other and finding out, you know, is one a spender, is one a saver? You know, what sort of are your financial goals? Do you want to buy a house? Do you plan to have a family, which is obviously going to cost money? You've got to work out what your sort of plan of attack is, because ultimately if you have one person that is incredibly frugal and another that is a spendthrift, it can really end up being a match made, you know, not a match made in heaven, it can be an absolute disaster.
Yeah, match made in hell, you might say.
Exactly.
It's funny, I've come across like more than a few couples recently I've found who've had joint money and starting to do the separate money thing again. I think people always overestimate what the other person spends. I think, as you said, some transparency and some cold hard numbers in discussions always helps. But, you know, there are pretty bad consequences if you can't manage to get it right.
Absolutely. I mean, Brooke, we've got all, I'm sure you have, I've known friends who have had, you know, relationship breakdowns because they haven't been on the same financial page. You know, partners lying about how they manage their money, some siphoning off money. You know, it can often end in divorce. I mean, divorce rates are really high in Australia. So it's important that, you know, you talk about your money situation. If you are in trouble, discuss it as, you know, a partnership. And also, when you're taking out loans and things like credit cards with a partner, you have to be really careful. You need to know where they stand financially, because if one of you default, or as a joint you default, it will impact both of you and leave black marks on your credit file. So once you're in a partnership, you've really got to be open and honest, because sure enough, it will end in tears.
This is definitely a question without notice. I'm finding myself thinking, do you think debt is a deal breaker when it comes to relationships? To meet someone heavily in debt, is that just a no-go zone, do you reckon?
Well, Brooke, it depends what sort of debt. I mean, is it bad debt? Is it credit cards, personal loans, you know, buy now, pay later schemes? Or is it good debt? You know, are everyone who is investing in property or shares, a large, you know, majority of them actually have debt because they're paying off loans. There is good debt and bad debt, but it's being able to manage your debt. If you have met someone who's armed with debt, such as credit cards, you know, you've got to work this out together, because ultimately that is going to be a problem for you down the track, especially if you're helping that person try and clear those debts.
Hey, there was a funny survey today, Sophie, that showed about 1 in 5 young Australian couples, so we're talking about under 30s, admit to pinching money out of their partner's wallet once in a while. Interestingly, as you look through the figures, the older people get, the less likely they are to do it. What do you reckon is going on there?
I mean, this is really bad, Brooke. The fact that you are going through your partner's wallet and taking money, you really need to question why you're doing this. That is not good. And lying about it as well is also another big no-no. So I reckon it's got a lot to do with now, you know, we want everything now. That instant gratification, we have to have it now, we will not wait. If it's resorting to people, you know, scrounging through their partner's wallets, I mean, that is a serious problem, and ultimately it's a massive breach of trust.
Do you reckon you can excuse it away by saying, you know, it was supposed to be in this cashless society, and certainly young people think just tap, tap, tap away. And you do have those moments. I'm going to admit I've had them, and I've thought, if that coffee shop doesn't take cards, I may be in a spot, I'll just grab the 10 bucks out of the other person's wallet just in case. There's a bit of that going on, don't you reckon?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you have to borrow $10 and let your partner know later, that's not the end of the world. but it is a problem when it starts to become serious amounts of money. And, you know, ultimately we just have to be honest with each other, because if we're not, it will end in tears. So money is absolutely a deal breaker with relationships. So just make sure you have a partner that is open with you about how they manage their money, because you don't want to be talking about this when you're working out a divorce and going through, you know, heartache and realising what debts they may have that you may have no idea about.
Hey, Sophie, great to have you on the program. Juicy topic too. Thank you, Sophie Elsworth from News Corp.